Montana Territory, spring of 1879, the wind was dry and sharp, and the girl was being dragged behind a wagon. Ruthie Whitlow's bare feet tore against the dirt road, and her wrists bound by a coarse rope tied to the rear axle of the supply wagon burned raw. Her dress was ripped halfway down the back, her face smeared with blood and dust. She had spoken. That was all, spoken against the preacher's son putting his hands where they did not belong. They had called her a liar, then a whore, and now they were dragging her for the sin of opening her mouth. "Teach her to keep quiet," one of the men ahead muttered, not bothering to look back. The wheels creaked. The horses huffed. And Ruthie's breath came in short, broken gasps. The world narrowed to pain and the taste of iron. Then up ahead, somewhere beyond the wagon's dust cloud, a low whistle cut through the air. It was sharp, steady, like a sound someone made to call a dog. The wagon slowed, then stopped. "What the hell?" one of the men started. The next second, a shot rang out. One of the horses reared. A man cursed. Then another shot closer, and the man holding the reins, the same who had tied her, dropped like a sack of flour, blood pouring from his thigh. Out of the trees, riding hard, came a stranger on a roan mare. He wore a battered hat low over his eyes and a tan duster pulled tight to his chest. The rifle in his hand did not shake. "Cut her loose," the cowboy said, voice calm and low. The men, two still standing, froze. One reached for his pistol. The cowboy did not give a second warning. Another shot. The pistol clattered to the dirt, the man howling and grabbing his hand. "I said cut her loose," he repeated, hands trembling. The last man standing fumbled with a knife and slashed the rope. Ruthie collapsed into the dirt, barely conscious. The cowboy dismounted fast. He knelt beside her, checking her wrists, then lifted her up, easy as lifting a child. She was not light, but he held her firmly without strain. "Got you," he said, and something in his voice cracked through the fog in her mind. She blinked up at him, dazed. "You shot them." "I did," he said. "And I should have done it sooner." "Why?" she whispered. He looked down at her, eyes the color of storm clouds, "Because no woman should be punished for speaking the truth." Then he turned and walked toward his horse, Ruthie in his arms, her head resting against his shoulder. The men behind them did not move. They were too afraid to. The cowboy did not look back. They rode west for hours, through tall grass and hills that rolled like ocean waves. The cowboy's name was Quillan Graves. He said it quietly after she asked. "I am Ruthie," she said, her voice hoarse. He nodded once. "You need water and rest." "I can walk," she said. "You cannot," he said, not unkindly. She did not argue after that. By the time the sun began to dip, they reached a small cabin nestled at the edge of a pine grove. It was built with care, solid logs, clean porch, smoke curling from the chimney. "You live alone?" she asked. "I do," he said, helping her down. He carried her inside, laid her gently on the narrow cot near the hearth, then disappeared briefly. When he returned, he brought a basin of water, a clean cloth, and a tin cup. "Drink this," he said. She obeyed, her hands trembling. He knelt beside her without a word, dipped the cloth in water, and began cleaning her face. His touch was gentle, careful. Not once did he flinch at her bruises or the dried blood. "You knew them?" she asked. "No," he said. "Just saw what they were doing. That was enough." She watched him, really saw him now. He was not young, maybe 30, with a jaw shadowed by stubble and a scar running from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. His hands were rough but kind. "You could have left me there." "I could have," he agreed. "Why did you not?" He met her eyes then, and his voice was quiet. "Because I would not sleep knowing I had ridden away from something like that." Ruthie looked away, her throat tight. "They said I was lying, that I wanted it. You were not, and you did not." She blinked fast, then reached for the blanket and pulled it over her shoulders. "Thank you." Quillan stood, jaw tight. "You will rest here tonight. You are safe." He turned to give her space, but her voice stopped him. "Quillan," he looked back. "I am not afraid of you." His eyes softened. "Good." He brought her stew, later plain beans and rabbit, and sat across the room while she ate. He did not speak much, but his presence settled around her like a shield. That night, Ruthie lay awake on the cot, listening to the fire crackle. She could see him in the glow, sitting in the chair by the door, rifle across his lap. She watched him, and for the first time in weeks, her heart did not race with fear. It beat, slow and steady, like it remembered how to breathe. The next morning, when she opened her eyes, he was gone from the chair, but the door was ajar. A breeze fluttered through, and the scent of pine filled the room. She sat up slowly, her body aching but whole. Outside, she found him chopping wood. He had stripped off his coat, sleeves rolled to the elbow. His movements were clean, practiced. "You do not talk much," she said, stepping onto the porch. He glanced over, sweat on his brow. "Not much to say. I think I talk too much," she said. His eyes met hers. "Keep talking." She blinked, caught off guard. He set the axe down and walked over, wiping his hands on a rag. "No one should silence you, least of all with rope and blood." Ruthie looked at him, really looked, and something in her chest shifted. "Do you think I am broken?" she asked. "No," he said, voice solid. "I think you are still standing." She nodded once, lips pressed tight. "Do you have folks?" he asked. "No," she said. "My parents died 2 winters ago. I was working as a laundress for the church folk." "You do not have to go back, I know," she said quietly. "I do not want to." He studied her face. "You can stay here until you want to leave." "And if I never want to?" she asked, half teasing, half afraid. His voice was calm. "Then you will not." Ruthie stared at him, heart thudding, a man who had seen her at her lowest and did not flinch. Who had carried her without asking why, who had not asked for anything in return. She took a step closer. "You are not what I expected," he shrugged. "I am not much of anything. You are more than anything I have ever known." He looked at her then, longer this time, a quiet heat in his eyes. Neither of them said another word, but something had shifted, and neither of them would pretend otherwise. By the 3rd day, Ruthie could move without flinching. She stepped barefoot into the creek behind the cabin, the water cold but clean, trickling past her shins with the quiet insistence of spring thaw. Her dress, scrubbed and mended at the seams with thread she'd found in a drawer by the hearth, floated around her knees. She crouched, hands cupped, and splashed her face, letting the chill settle her nerves. Up the hill, Quillan was tending the fence line. She heard the steady rhythm of his hammer, the occasional rustle of brush as he cleared the path. He hadn't asked her to help, and she hadn't offered yet. She dried her arms with the hem of her skirt and looked toward the distant ridge. The last time she'd seen that sky, she'd been half-conscious, face down in the dirt. Now it looked different, still wide, still cruel in its size, but no longer like it meant to swallow her whole. That evening, she brought in a bundle of pine boughs for kindling and found him seated at the table, oil lamp casting shadows across his jaw. He was stitching a tear in his saddlebag with careful, even strokes. "You sew better than I do," she said, setting the wood by the hearth. "I've had practice." He didn't look up, but there was no edge in his voice. "Where'd you learn?" "Ranch outside Cheyenne. Man I rode for was stingy with his supplies. You tore it, you fixed it." She took the seat across from him, folding her hands. "You stayed there long, 3 years. Left after a winter storm took the herd. Couldn't keep meat on the cattle, and the foreman started drinking through the feed budget." He tied off the thread, clipped the end with his knife, and finally met her eyes. "What about you?" "You always live in town." "I was born in a dugout on the prairie," she said. "West of Dodge, wind came down the chimney like it meant to freeze us out. After my folks passed, I drifted east, laundry, cleaning, helping women with births where I could. Thought a town with a church might be kinder." She glanced at the fire, the weight of the words dull in her throat. "I was wrong." He said nothing for a long while, just watched the light flicker across her face. Then, "You were brave to say what you did." "No," she said. "I was tired." He leaned back, arms crossed. "Brave and tired aren't different things." That night, she stood outside long after he'd gone in, watching the stars appear one by one. They didn't blink like lanterns in the dark, they burned steady, like they knew she was watching. In the silence, she whispered a name she hadn't spoken in years, her mother's, and let the wind carry it wherever it went. The next morning, she found him kneeling beside a crate near the barn, sorting through tools. Without asking, she crouched beside him and picked up a file, handing it over. He raised an eyebrow. "You know what you're doing." "I know a rasp from a wrench, if that's what you mean." He nodded once, then passed her a bit of leather and a broken buckle. "See if you can fix this." They worked without much talk. The sun rose high, brushed their shoulders, and moved on. She didn't notice the ache in her hands until he stood and said, "Come on, I got something to show you." She followed him past the barn, through a patch of dry sage and up an incline she hadn't explored. At the top, the land opened wide. A shallow valley spread below, and in it, a dozen wild horses grazed near a half-dried creek bed. She stared, breath caught. "You never said there were horses out here." "Not mine," he said. "They come down in spring." "Keep to themselves." They stood there in silence, the air still but for the flick of tails in the field below. She spoke first, voice low. "You built all this alone," he nodded. "Took 3 summers. Doesn't feel lonely," he glanced at her. "Not anymore." Her breath hitched, but she didn't look away. A long breeze moved through the grass between them. "Do you want me to stay?" she asked finally. Yes, there was no hesitation in his voice, no pause for thought, just the one word, heavy as a promise. She stepped closer, face upturned. "Then I will." He reached out, slow, as if giving her time to pull away, but she didn't. His hand brushed her cheek, the first real touch between them. Not rescue, not tending wounds, just touch. She leaned into it, eyes closing. In that still moment, with the wind in the grass and the wild horses below, something settled between them. Not spoken, not rushed. Just the quiet knowledge that they had found each other in a world that had done its best to break them both. He lowered his hand, eyes steady. "You hungry?" she laughed, sudden and soft. "Always." They walked back side by side, and the silence they shared was not empty. It was full of everything they didn't have to say. By the time late spring settled over the land like a calming hand, Ruthie had learned the rhythm of the place. The days stretched long and quiet, filled with the scent of sun-warmed fur and the scrape of tools against wood or stone. Quillan never rushed her, never expected more than she gave, and yet she found herself offering more, not out of debt but choice. That morning she woke to the distant sound of a harmonica. Faint, wandering, like someone playing for the memory of a tune rather than the tune itself. She stepped outside barefoot, the earth cool beneath her feet, and found him near the corral, sitting on the edge of the fence with the instrument in his hands. "You play," she said, brushing a braid over her shoulder. He looked up, a little caught. "Some." "Not well." "I think it sounds like morning," she said. He gave a small nod and tucked the harmonica into his coat pocket. "You sleep all right." "I dreamed of rain," she said. "Nothing else, just rain on the roof." He tilted his head. "That's not a bad dream." "No," she agreed. "It's not." They spent most of the day tending to the small garden patch behind the cabin. The soil was dry in places, stubborn in others, but she worked it with care, sleeves rolled and nails packed with dirt. He showed her how to check for beetle holes in the leaves and how to tell which stalks needed thinning. "You always talk to your plants?" he asked, glancing over from where he was pulling weeds. "Only when they look like they're trying to die," she said. He smiled just a little. Not wide, not for show, but enough for her to see it. Around midday, a rider approached from the south trail. Ruthie spotted the dust first, then the glint of metal at the saddle. Quillan stood, his hand resting just near his holster, not drawing, just waiting. The rider was older, with a long coat dusted in road grit and a worn U.S. Marshal badge pinned crooked on his vest. He stopped 10 yards out and raised a hand in greeting. "Graves," he called, voice rasped from the sun. "Dorsey," Quillan answered. "You're far from your rounds." The marshal glanced toward Ruthie, then back to Quillan. "Looking for a girl. Town preacher's son's been carrying on about vengeance. Says she tried to ruin his name." Ruthie stepped forward, chin high. "She didn't." Dorsey regarded her, then nodded once. "Didn't think she had. Boy's never worked a day in his life, but his father's loud, and loud men gather fools." Quillan didn't move. "You here to take her back?" "No," Dorsey said. "I'm here to say they're coming this way. 10, maybe 12. 2 days out at most." Ruthie felt it in her chest first, a cold tightening followed by a steady anger. Dorsey adjusted his reins. "I figured you'd want to know." "You did right," Quillan said. The marshal turned his horse, then paused. "You still shoot like you did in Kansas." "Better," Quillan said. Dorsey gave a nod that wasn't approval so much as understanding, then rode off down the hill without another word. Ruthie stood still as the wind tugged at her skirt. Quillan looked at her. "You don't have to stay." "I know," she said. "If you leave now, you can get to the pass before they reach the lower ridge." She stepped closer. And go where? Back to washing linens for women who won't look me in the eye, back to being told I'm a liar for speaking the truth. He said nothing. She placed a hand against his chest, above his heart. I'd rather stand here, beside someone who doesn't flinch when I do. He covered her hand with his, fingers warm and calloused. Then we prepare. The next day passed with purpose. She filled water barrels and packed provisions while he checked the rifle stocks and set iron traps along the lower path. She learned the land beneath her feet, not just where the trees stood, but where the ground dipped low and the wind carried sound. They spoke little, but what passed between them was trust, plain and steady. That night they sat on the porch, a lantern between them. Neither touched it. The stars were enough. You fight well, she asked. Well enough, he said. And if they bring more than 12, then we fight like we've got 20. They sat in silence, the kind that wasn't empty but filled with things waiting to be spoken. She turned toward him. If they come, I'll be ready. He didn't argue. He just looked at her like she'd already proven everything she needed to. When she lay down that night, she didn't dream of rain. She dreamed of standing barefoot in a field, holding a rifle in her hands, and knowing she belonged. The wind shifted on the second day, carrying with it the scent of sage crushed under hooves. Ruthie stood at the edge of the small bluff behind the cabin, one palm resting against the bark of a jack pine, her eyes scanning the rise where the trail bent east. Nothing yet, but the feeling had changed. The quiet wasn't just quiet, it was listening. Quillan finished dragging a log into place across the narrow pass below. He straightened, wiped the back of his hand across his brow, and glanced toward her. They'll come through that draw, he said. Won't risk open ground if they think I'm still here. Ruthie nodded, stepping down to where he stood. How many rifles? 3, maybe 4 worth using. The rest had their barrels rusted or warped near the muzzle. I split the good ones between the cabin and the barn. She crouched beside the stacked logs, testing the bracing. We'll slow them, but we won't stop them here. I know. She looked at him, the set of his shoulders, the way he stood still when the wind picked up. You ever had to kill a man face to face? He didn't answer right away. Then, yes, she didn't press further. They returned to the cabin without speaking. Inside, the air held the scent of gun oil and cedar smoke. Ruthie gathered strips of cloth and began wrapping them around the handles of the tools. They'd sharpened a hatchet, 2 long blades, and the iron rod Quillan had pried from the stove's old frame. I never thought I'd be preparing for something like this, she said quietly. He looked up from knotting a coil of rope. You could have turned away. I've done enough of that before. The light shifted across the floorboards as afternoon leaned toward dusk. Ruthie rose and crossed to the cupboard. She took down a shallow tin box from the top shelf. Inside was a pair of combs, a broken brooch, and a folded piece of paper. She opened it with care. What's that? Quillan asked. My father's land deed, she said. Signed in Kansas 18 years ago. He never got to claim it. We buried him before the frost that year. He stepped closer, looking over her shoulder at the faded ink. It's still yours. Not anymore. County took it back. Said without a man to sign, it reverted. Quillan was quiet a long moment. Then they'll never take this place from you. She folded the paper and tucked it back inside the box. They'll try. Not while I'm breathing. She looked at him then, fully, without fear or hesitation. When this is over, if we win it, what then? He held her gaze. You stay, I stay. We make something from it. A pause, and then she asked, even if I can't give you children. He reached out, brushing her wrist with the back of his fingers, slow and sure. You've already given me everything I didn't know I needed. She stood still, heart loud in her chest. Later, as darkness settled around them, they kept the lamps dim and the fire low. Ruthie sat at the table, polishing the last rifle stock with a cloth. Quillan took the chair across from her, his eyes on her hands. I used to think silence meant safety, she said. If I didn't speak, if I didn't push, I'd be left alone. I used to think distance did the same. Did it? No, just made the nights longer. She set the rifle down, palm resting on the wood. You don't keep a Bible here, he shook his head. Had one once. Pages turned to dust when the roof leaked. You still believe in anything? He reached across the table, lacing his fingers through hers. I believe in what we've built, and I believe I'd do anything to keep it. A hawk cried somewhere distant, and they both turned toward the sound. "They'll come at dawn," he said. "I'll be ready." When they stood to go rest, Ruthie paused near the door. "If something happens if you fall, I won't. But if you do," he stepped in close, resting his forehead against hers. "You carry on, you keep this place. You live." She held him by the collar then, not to pull him close, he was already close, but to keep herself from shaking. "Don't make me bury another man I care for." His hands steadied her body, one at her back, the other at her waist. "You won't." They stood like that until the moon climbed high and the fire burned down to its last flickers. Then they lay down, not to sleep, but to rest beside each other, holding fast to the warmth and the weight of what they'd found. Outside, the wind carried dust across the ridge. And somewhere beyond the draw, the riders gathered. They came at first light. Ruthie had just finished tying her braid when the first shot cracked against the hillside, echoing sharp and clear through the stillness. Quillan was already at the west window, eyes narrowed, rifle steady. "They're fanning out," he said, "trying to press us from both sides." She moved to the hearth and lifted the rifle he'd left ready. Her hands were dry, her breath even. "I'll take the barn side," she said. He looked at her just once. "You hold if they rush, don't waste bullets," she nodded. "You too." The morning unfolded in fragments. The sharp pop of gunfire, the dry scrape of boots across gravel, the low grit of voices they couldn't see. Ruthie crouched behind the corner beam of the barn, heart thrumming slow and hard. She caught the first man creeping up along the fence line. He wore a blue neckerchief pulled over his mouth, but she could see the shine of his buttons. She waited until he stepped past the broken trough and then fired once. He dropped. He didn't rise. She stood guard longer than needed, eyes sweeping the trees, until a second shot from the cabin window told her Quillan was still holding. They came in pulses. Groups of 2 or 3, none with the nerve to charge outright. The traps slowed them. The logs did more. Ruthie fired only when she saw eyes, only when they came close enough that she could smell the sweat and old whiskey on their jackets. At some point, the wind picked up. It carried the sharp tang of gunpowder and churned the dust along the trail, making the shapes harder to track. Still, they held. Quillan moved like a man who'd done this before, but not recently. There was effort in his aim, in the way he shifted to reload. Ruthie kept close to the barn's edge, ducking between beams, firing low and fast when they came near. Mid-morning, it went quiet. Ruthie stepped into the open, rifle high. "Quillan, here." She turned and saw him walking toward her from the porch. He was limping, blood dark on his left thigh. "Where?" she asked, already crossing to him. "Crease." Bullet skidded the muscle. "Hurts like hell." She helped him to the porch and tore the hem from her underskirt to wrap the wound. He didn't flinch. His jaw was set, but his hands stayed steady. "How many left?" she asked. He shook his head. 2, maybe 3, rest scattered. "Lost their nerve." She stood, rifle still in hand. "Then we end this." They found the last of them near the southern edge of the field. One man had tripped a trap and lay moaning, legs snapped clean. Another ran when he saw Quillan rise from behind the rocks. Ruthie didn't fire, she let him go. The third was crouched behind a boulder, gun aimed low. "You come to finish it," he called. "No," Quillan said, stepping into view. "I came to tell you to walk or stay and get buried." The man's gun hand wavered, then he tossed it aside and stumbled back down the ridge. They didn't speak again until they reached the cabin. Quillan leaned against the doorframe, sweat soaking his collar. Ruthie eased his coat off and cleaned the wound proper, boiling water and packing it with clean strips of cloth from the cupboard. "You're lucky," she said. "Missed anything deep, still hurts." "I didn't say it wouldn't." He let out a low breath, then caught her wrist as she rose. You saved me first." He shook his head. "No, you saved yourself." "I just happened to be there." She looked down at his hand on hers and didn't pull away. "You think they'll come back?" she asked. "No, too many dead, too many humiliated." She sat beside him on the cot. "Then we're free." He reached up and tucked a piece of her hair behind her ear, rough fingers gentle. "You feel free?" "I do," she said. "For the first time since I was a girl, I do." He leaned in then, not fast, not demanding, just a man offering something real. She met him halfway. Their lips brushed soft, warm, and when he kissed her again, she closed her eyes and let the weight of every old hurt fall away. That night, the fire burned slow. Ruthie lay curled against Quillan beneath the single quilt, her head on his shoulder, her hand resting over the bandage on his thigh. "You ever plan to marry?" she asked. He was quiet a moment. Then, not until now, she smiled against his skin. "I'd say yes if you asked." He turned toward her, fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "Then I'm asking, stay here with me, be my wife. Make this place ours." She looked at him, heart wide open. Yes, in the weeks that followed, the land came back to life. The creek ran higher with spring melt, and the wild horses returned to graze near the far slope. Ruthie planted more than she'd thought to beans, squash, even a patch of sunflowers along the porch. Quillan's limp faded, and the scar that remained became something she touched each night, a reminder of the day they chose to stay and fight together. By midsummer, a preacher riding circuit stopped at the cabin. They married under the same pine tree where Ruthie had stood watch that morning, her hand in Quillan's, the sun painting gold across the hills. Later that evening, she sat on the porch, watching the light fade, her fingers smelling faintly of earth and rosemary. Quillan came out with 2 mugs of chicory brew and sat beside her. "You think the quiet'll last?" she asked. He handed her a mug. "Maybe not always. But long enough," she leaned against him. "Long enough's plenty." The stars came out slow and the wind turned warm. They sat together, not needing words, and when the coyotes howled far off in the ridges, Ruthie held his hand and whispered, "This is home." Quillan nodded once. "It is now, and it always would be."